Great. Thank you very much. Good morning. Let's see, it's 10:13 a.m. on March 13th, 2025, and I would like to call the meeting of the Racial and Identity Profiling Advisory Board to order. Good morning. I'm Angela Sierra. I'm Attorney General Rob Bonta's designee on the RIPA board and a co-chair of the board. I want to welcome all of our RIPA board members who are joining us today, as well as all the members of the public who are with us as well. And I want to also welcome and say good morning to all our DOJ staff that is assisting us today. This is our first full board meeting of this 2025 calendar year. And as you all know, we have a full agenda today. I very much look forward to a robust conversation about the important agenda items we have that we'll be considering today, and as well as listening and hearing, all perspectives from the members of this board, as well as members of our community during our public comment period. Today, we're going to have an opportunity to both reflect on the last report that we issued this last January, as well as to brainstorm about our important work moving forward. I will now turn this over to my co-chair, Andrea Guerrero, for her introduction, and then we will then turn it over to all our board members to go around our virtual room so that everybody has an opportunity to introduce themselves. So I'll turn it over to you, Andrea.
Thank you, Angela. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Guerrero. I am the appointee of former Senate President Pro Tem Tony Atkins, and I'm with the organization Alliance San Diego. Happy to be here, and I will turn it over to LaWanda Hawkins. And maybe while LaWanda is coming on camera, and it would be great if all board members could come on camera, how about I pass it to board member Suli Diallo.
Good morning. My name is Sule Diallo. I am a supervising deputy public defender, Riverside County Public Defender's Office, and I am an appointee of the California Public Defenders Association. And with that, I'll pass it to board member Kajabi.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Lily Kajabi. I'm a professor in the Mathematics, Statistics, and Data Science Department at Loyola Marymount University in rainy, now sunny Los Angeles this morning. And I'm an appointee of the Attorney General's Office, and very pleased to be with you all this morning. I'd like to pass it on. Can I pass it on to Manju Kulkarni? I see you on my screen.
Yeah. Thank you, Lily. Good morning, everyone. Manju Kulkarni, Executive Director of AAPI Equity Alliance and co-founder of Stop AAPI Hate, and a designee of former Speaker Anthony Rendon. I will pass it along to Board Member Green.
Good morning, Captain Darren Green with the California High Patrol, sitting in for Commissioner Sean DeRee, who's appointed by retired Governor Jerry Brown. Thank you for the introduction and good morning, and I'll pass it along to Board Member Chauncey Smith.
Oh, Chauncey, we can't hear you. You may be on mute.
Hello? Can you hear me now?
Great. Yes.
All right. So I was just saying, Chauncey Smith, I'm with Catalyst California. I'm an appointee of Attorney General Rob Bonta, pronouns he, him, his. I will pass it to LaWanda.
Good morning. My name is LaWanda Hawkins. I'm appointed by former Governor Jerry Brown, and I'm with the organization called Justice for Murdered Children, and we're located here in Los Angeles. I just turned on the camera because I just got in the location. So can someone assist me with the next board member, please?
Sure. Why don't we turn over to John Dobard?
Morning, John Dobard, he, him, with Catalyst California, appointee of Speaker Emeritus Anthony Rendon. I'm going to pass it over to Board Member Vang.
Good morning, everyone. Cha Vang, appointed by former AG Becerras, she, her, and with APIs for Civic Empowerment Education. Is that everybody?
I believe that is everybody. Great. Well, thank you and good morning. We can now move on to item number 3 on our agenda, which is the approval of our November 19th, 2024 full board meeting minutes. I'll give everybody an opportunity just to pull those up in a few minutes if you want to take a final look at those, and then we can entertain a motion by any of you if anybody would like to move to approve those minutes. And those minutes were provided to all of us with the board meeting package materials.
And Mr. Chair, let the record show that Commissioner Kreiner, Fresno, California, is here.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. Good morning. Sorry we missed you here in the introductions.
Oh, no problem at all. I enjoyed everybody's introduction.
Yes. Okay, so I don't know if you've heard this last part, but we're just taking a quick look, final look at the minutes, and then we'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Kreiner, Fresno, I move that the minutes be accepted as read and presented.
Thank you very much. Do we, so we have a motion for approval of the November 19th, 2024 full board meeting minutes. Do we have a second?
I second that motion. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you. So Lily Kajabi, a second. So can our DOJ staff do a roll call vote?
Absolutely. So pending is a motion to approve the November minutes from the full board meeting as written. Pastor Kreiner?
Yes.
Pastor Kreiner votes aye. Souley Diallo?
Aye.
Souley Diallo votes aye. John Dobard?
Aye.
John Dobard votes aye. Darren Green?
Aye.
Darren Green votes aye. Andrea Guerrero?
Aye.
Andrea Guerrero votes aye. LaWanda Hawkins?
Aye.
LaWanda Hawkins votes aye. Lily Kajabi?
Aye.
Lily Kajabi votes aye. Manju Kulkarni?
Aye.
Manju Kulkarni votes aye. Angela Sierra?
Aye.
Angela Sierra votes aye. Chauncey Smith? I'm sorry, Member Smith, we can't hear you. Member Smith, we'll come back to you. And Member Cha Vang?
Hello. You can hear me? Yes, I vote yes.
Wonderful. Chauncey Smith votes yes, and Cha Vang?
I'm gonna abstain. I wasn't present.
Okay, and Cha Vang abstains. The motion carries with 10 yeses. And the minutes are approved.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on to our next agenda item, which is our subcommittee reports. So we'll take these in order. Why don't we start with our STOP Data Analysis Subcommittee? And if there is a chair of that committee or a member that would like to provide the report.
Great. Thank you so much. So the STOP Data Analysis Subcommittee met on March 5th recently. We welcomed, I want to say, first of all, we're very pleased to welcome Board Member Chauncey Smith from the General Board to our subcommittee. Thank you. The primary focus of the meeting was a very rich discussion about topics for the focus of this year's report. And in the backdrop of that is the fact that this year's data has been collected reflecting some new elements. So, for example, identifying the type of stop, distinguishing vehicle, pedestrian, bicyclist stops, for example, instead of trying to infer that from the basis of the stop or any code violation that was cited. And so we created a rich list of topics for exploration in the coming report. And let me indicate some of those. So in particular, first of all, looking at stop data by region and agency with the goal of identifying hotspots of police activities in order to better understand the nature and impact of agencies' policies and training. I want to clarify that doesn't mean a specific location like the intersection of streets, but an agency or a region as a hotspot, if you will. And this may focus on use of force, or handcuffing, searches, or use of consent, field interview cards, and more. Secondarily, analyzing stops that don't involve the use of a car to better understand practices. So as I mentioned, for example, bicyclist and pedestrian stops can be disaggregated now more explicitly. And historically, in regions such as Los Angeles, pedestrians, for example, were sometimes more likely to be subject to some sort of search or a frisk at higher rates than you'd see nationally. And so being able to distinguish the type of stops that don't involve a car may be very important. Also analyzing the newly reported data in light of the use of consent searches by agencies. So observing if there have been effective or not policy changes at agencies. Also, the data now will reflect the way in which consent is demonstrated. So an officer might indicate that that was a verbal, written, or even consent deemed implicit by the officer. And so having this information about basis for consent really will give us a good window in, I hope, to practices of particular agencies. And then a little more briefly, looking at the newly reported data regarding officer self-identified race, continuing to focus on pretext stops and the resulting harms of profiling. In particular, for example, policies around fatalities from vehicle pursuits if there are car crashes. Also analyzing more deeply the duration of a stop to better understand the impact of a stop and even the what some might call the life cycle of a stop, the stages of a stop. And then just a couple more. So it's a very rich list. Looking now at a longitudinal analysis, in particular, the Wave 1 agencies. Those are the larger agencies such as LAPD, CHP. We now have data for many years. So looking longitudinally to see if things have changed since the impact of or the enactment of RIPA. There was also discussion about stops that would stem from a call for service versus more discretionary stops by law enforcement. And so I'll just say in this long array of rich topics, the DOJ will be looking into these and will report back on the feasibility at the next subcommittee meeting. And I hope this will be part of our discussion today as well. And then two more global issues, data dashboard. The DOJ is looking into vendors now for creating a data dashboard for statewide data. And as a companion to that, and maybe I'll add, is informing all of our work, public input on board work. And so in particular, the subcommittee would like to get public input on ways in which the data and report can be made more accessible, particularly the data dashboard. The board could consider convening a group outside of the subcommittee, even the full board meeting, or in a subcommittee to get that more targeted public input. And on this last goal, I just want to add that very important point was raised at the subcommittee meeting that members of the public shouldn't need special resources such as special software to have an eye on the data. And we want this information to be available in a digestible way, which is vital for transparency and building public trust. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Terrific. And now we will have a report from our state and local racial and identity profiling policies subcommittee.
Yep, the policy subcommittee held its first meeting on February 26th of this year. We discussed several potential topics for this year's report, including examining the negative consequences of policing, including the impacts on the safety of Black and brown communities, also analyzing hotspot policing data across the state and its relationship to racial and identity profiling, examining the impact of policy changes related to pretext stops, analyzing stop data to understand the trajectory of individual stops, examining the allocation of police resources, and doing a deeper dive on disparities based on language proficiency. The subcommittee decided it would like to focus on ways to increase public safety, particularly in Black and Brown communities, as our theme. And we'd like to examine different elements of this theme, such as the factors that contribute to communities being and feeling safe, the relationship between those factors and negative police interactions, the drivers and evolution of racial and identity profiling over time, and the consequences of over-policing and hotspot policing, including potential data analyses of geographic trends in racial and identity profiling across the state, the impact of changes to pretext stop policies by LAPD and SFPD, trends in stop data for each individual stop. So, for example, trends in stops of perceived demographics, including language proficiency. DOJ is looking into the possibility of conducting these data analyses, and we'll report back at our next subcommittee meeting. This includes reporting back on whether an analysis of the LAPD and SFPD pretext stop policies should be part of the annual report or released in some other form.
Great. Thank you so much for that report. Next, we'll have a report readout from our post-training and recruitment subcommittee.
Hi, thanks. So we met for the first time this year on March the 10th, this past Monday, and our meeting covered largely three main areas: a discussion of the 2025 report, our plans for the 2026 report, and the ongoing relationship with Post. In terms of the 2025 report, we covered the fact that AB 953 requires the REPA board to analyze the post-commission profiling training courses and to include in its findings the annual REPA report. AB 953 requires Post to develop courses of instruction and guidelines to ensure law enforcement agencies comply with California and federal law and trainings to meet those required training objectives. And so upon REPA's enactment, Post identified 8 courses that met AB 953's requirements. And so over the past 7 years, the REPA board, and in particular, the Post subcommittee, has reviewed most of the racial and identity profile training courses provided by Post. And last year in the 2024 report, the board paused its review of the courses to participate in Post workshops to develop guidelines for racial and identity profiling courses and policies. And the remaining course for the board to review is a field training, which we'll be reviewing this year and next year. At the subcommittee meeting, we went through a summary of the Post section. And with respect to the Post guidelines, the REPA board relayed its concerns to Post about outdated legal standards and the need for guidelines to apply to all existing and future Post certified racial and identity profiling courses. We will be inviting Post to speak at our next subcommittee meeting to discuss the guidelines and their response to the 2025 report recommendations. In terms of the 2026 report, we will focus on evaluating the Post field training program, which I mentioned. The field training is a continuation of the basic academy and facilitates a peace officer's transition from an academic setting to the performance of general law enforcement duties of the employing department. Newly assigned officers and deputies must receive additional training in the field on actual calls of service where they can learn from officers who already have the practical patrol experience. New officers are assigned to a field training officer who is an experienced officer selected and trained to conduct this type of training. And so to thoroughly review this critical on-the-ground training, the subcommittee will review the field training program over the next 2 years. And in sum, the report will include, number one, a review of the published post guidelines. Number two, an analysis of post response to the 2025 report recommendations. Number three, part one of the field training program review. And number four, recommendations to the legislature and to post. And finally, in terms of our ongoing relationship, REPA co-chair Sierra provided the post subcommittee with an update of the REPA co-chair's ongoing efforts with post to improve communications and effectiveness of the board's relationship with post. So that's it.
Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to our final subcommittee. It's the Accountability and Civilian Complaints Subcommittee.
Good morning. We met in on February the 12th of this year. All board members were there. And I say thank you. And we had some recommendations regarding post, information from post. And these were some of the recommendations that we came up with. We're asking post, and it goes along with what we've been discussing earlier today regarding the youth. We're asking post to modify the complaint form to use that they use to file complaints under SB 2 to allow the complaints to indicate where the allegations arise from an incident involving a person 17 and younger or between the ages of 18 and 24. These are just recommendations because somehow they're not on there. And so we thought it would be, we need to look into that part of it. We need to know a little bit more regarding that, especially under this SB 2 right now. We also recommended that legislation amend Penal Code Section 13510.8 to require consideration of the complaint's age and determine a peace officer's conduct rise to the level of serious misconduct and warranting decertification. So it goes back to the youth. We really want to know the age because that plays a major role. The first contact with law enforcement as a young person can determine how you react and how you deal with them as an adult. So it's very important. We need to know the contact our youth are having with law enforcement. The post commit, we also, as the recommendation under the civilian complaint, the post commission amends regulation 1205 to require consideration of the complaint's age and determining if a peace officer's conduct rise to the level of serious misconduct that warrants decertification. And it's all based on these youth because we had no data. We just started getting the data, but we need regulation and legislation to go along with this because if it's not a requirement, we may not see the data. And so we're recommending that there be things put in place. Like legislation, and the commission amends their part of it. Regarding accountability recommendation, we, as the board, recommended that the legislation consult with post, law enforcement agencies, experts, researchers, and community groups about harmful conduct by officers that may not fit within the 9 categories of serious misconduct, because we've heard from other board members that there's things outside these 9 categories that we're being stopped for. And so we need to really look at this, and we need to hear from the community about these other categories that may not be included. And so it was just a recommendation that they look at. Again, it goes back to Penal Code 13510.8. to add any additional categories of serious misconduct that are harmful to the public and incompatible with a peace officer's duties. We're not saying that anyone's doing anything wrong, but we do just need to look at the data just to see. And it needs to be in legislation. It has to be some type of penal code because we just can't depend on people to do it. It just doesn't sometimes work like that. We also recommended that the legislation amend penal code again, 13510.8, subdivision D, to expand the authority of the post executive director to continue an immediate temporary suspension of an officer where the circumstances indicate that the officer continues to pose a danger to the public, even when one of the statutory grounds for imposing the immediate temporary suspension has been resolved. Okay, and I know people say, what are you saying? Well, right here, because at this point, sometimes people can plead, an officer can go in there, they can go through the procedures, they say, yeah, that we resolved the issue, but there's still a danger to public safety. And their chief of police was not allowed to fire them. I know that was here in LAPD. That was an issue. The chief was not allowed to fire certain people. So with post stepping in and saying, wait a minute, if we feel that there is a problem, then they should be let go, pose a danger. If they pose a danger to the public, even if they don't fit in their statutory grounds for imposing immediate temporary, they should be fired. We believe that we need to continue to analyze SB2 decertification data because it's new. And we need to really continue to look at that. These were the new topics for the year. We need to continue monitoring the LA Police Protective League case and its effect on deterrent language in the complaint form. Because if LA is the biggest one, if LA does it, everyone else, the little cities will follow. So we need to see that deterrent language can deter people from filing a complaint. If you feel that you're going to be sued, if you say certain, if you express how you feel, how you felt that this situation went down. And so it needs to be looked at. And we need to find out what's going on. What's the status of it now? The civilian oversight bodies, the evolution of how racial profiling occurs, and the consequences of these pretext stops. These were some of the things that we think, the topics that we would like to look at this year. We felt some of these topics might fit better in the police or stop data section of the report. So that's, we want to know, if they should be there or should they continue to be with us. We also decided it would like to focus on, again, analyzing SB2, developing best practice for civilian oversight bodies and the accountability section of the report, and monitoring the use of deterrent language in complaint forms. And that again goes back to LAPD Protective League. We also are asking for someone from Post to attend one of our meetings. And that's it.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Okay, that concludes the reports from our subcommittees. I want to thank everybody and all the members of the committees for their work. It's obvious that already there's been a significant amount of very substantive work that has been done in these subcommittees. And we'll be able to discuss those further later on in our agenda, particularly when we're talking about plans for our 2026 report this afternoon. And so I also, on this topic, just want to encourage all our subcommittee board members to attend the subcommittee meetings. Like, it's obvious, like, how much great work is being done at those meetings, to be in close contact with DOJ staff about their availability, because we just want to ensure that when we do have our planned meetings, that we're able to meet our quorums and be able to proceed, as well as to engage in this important work that really then kind of informs the work that we do as a full board. So thank you again. Let's see, our next topic on the agenda is updates by the Department of Justice, to be followed by a board discussion. So I'm going to turn it over to our DOJ staff.
Thank you, Co-Chair Sierra, and thank you to the members of the board. My name is Alex Simpson. I am one of the RIPA team members to participate on this year's report. Very happy, very lucky to work with all of you. And I'm just going to give a very short report out from the Department of Justice because I know the board has a lot of things that I'd like to discuss. So I'm going to try and take as little time as possible. So please bear with me. A couple of announcements and updates that the Department of Justice wanted to give to you, the board members, and to the members of the public who are listening to this meeting. First, wanted to let the board members and the members of the public know that our 2025 report was posted on January 1, 2025 on the Department of Justice website. So thanks to all the board members who made that happen. Thanks to the DOJ team to carry that over the gold line. It is very important work and want to encourage folks to review that report. Also want to encourage individuals who are interested in listening to the work of the board. We also participated in a CARE community briefing on January 21, 2025. Our Office of Community Awareness, Response, and Engagement hosted a community briefing on the 2025 RIPA report, and board members, including Board Member Smith here, who's attending today, participated in that briefing. And I'm going to drop a link to that if folks are interested in watching that and looking at the materials that were distributed in that presentation. Wanted to shift very briefly. I've got a short presentation with regards to requirements under the Bagley-Keene Act. This is kind of a refresher for board members and for members of the public, Bagley-Keene and board procedures. Give me 1 minute while I get this presentation started here. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Board procedures and Bagley-Keene open meeting. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so I hope this is informative and helpful, and most importantly, short, because I know, again, the board has quite a bit of work to do. We wanted to provide an overview of some of the responsibilities, the requirements under Bagley-Keene, and also discussion of proper board procedures for folks, just as a refresher for those newer board members who are, this is their first full report for this year. I'd like to talk about give just a very brief overview of the work that the RIPA board does. Want to talk about the responsibilities under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, and also talk about proper procedures for board meetings. This should come as no surprise to board members, but for also members of the public who are following along. The RIPA board is responsible for eliminating racial and identity profiling. And the penal code section that governs the RIPA board is Penal Code Section 13519.4. The purpose of the board is to eliminate racial and identity profiling. Procedurally, how that happens is 4 times a year, there will be a full board meeting of the type that we're in right now. This is the first full board meeting of 2025. The board also has subdivided its work into 4 subcommittees that the board is responsible, that the RIPA board in its entirety is responsible for reviewing every year. That's accountability and complaints, that's policies, that's stop data, and that's post, peace officer standards and training. And board members just reported out about the first subcommittee meeting of the year just recently. And so there are 3 subcommittee meetings for each subcommittee per year. All of these meetings are governed by Bagley-Keene. So all of the requirements under Bagley-Keene, which I'll talk about in a second, govern and dictate how those meetings should be conducted. I'm going to talk very generally about what Bagley-Keene means. And I'd also like to talk about what Bagley-Keene means as applied to board members in meetings and Bagley-Keene responsibilities for board members outside of meetings. And so very briefly, generally, Bagley-Keene, the Bagley-Keene Act promotes open consensus building, and the purpose of the act is to ensure that the public has the right to access information about the state's public business. The goal of the Bagley-Keene Act is to ensure that the actions of state bodies like the RIPA board are transparent and that the public can observe and participate in decision making. And so that's the purpose of the Bagley-Keene Act. It does apply to state bodies. RIPA is a state body, and so the Bagley-Keene Act applies to this board. In terms of meetings, the responsibilities of board members generally, as I had said, that the RIPA board meets 4 times annually. The RIPA board is actually required only to meet 3 times, but we meet 4 times annually. The RIPA board is permitted through January 1, 2026 to hold open and noticed meetings remotely. Obviously, we're having a remote meeting right now through the Teams app. So board members can participate remotely if they remain on camera, unless it's technologically impracticable. And I'm sure board members have heard this a number of times from DOJ at the beginning of each meeting. Board members, please keep your cameras on during the duration of the meeting. Board members can turn their camera off if they announce this is the reason why I'm not able to have my camera on. So those are the requirements in terms of not in person, remote meetings under Bagley-Keene. So the requirement of board members keep their cameras on and remote meetings are permitted. Outside of meetings, Bagley-Keene has a number of responsibilities that we want to make sure that board members are mindful of. So under Bagley-Keene, a meeting occurs anytime there's a majority of members that convene to hear, to discuss, to deliberate matters regarding the business of the state body of the board. And so the proper way is for a properly noticed meeting of the type that we're having right now. We want to avoid meetings that occur spontaneously when a majority of members convene to discuss board business outside of a public meeting, outside of a properly noticed meeting. So board members must recognize and prevent scenarios that trigger Bagley-Keene accidentally, unintentionally. That's the goal of the responsibilities outside of meetings that board members have. And sometimes that happens through what's called a serial communication. And those serial communications are prohibited under Bagley-Keene. Very briefly, when a board member discusses, either directly or through an intermediary, any board business outside of a meeting with another board member, and that communication circulates through to a majority of the board's members, that is a serial communication, and that's prohibited. And it applies to all forms of communication. It can be, an in-person meeting. It can be an email chain. It can be really any time where board members are discussing board business outside of the public noticed meeting. So examples of serial communications, I just gave one. Chain of emails by a majority of board members to discuss. Board member X sends an email to board member Y. Board member Y sends an email to board member Z, and that communication goes through a majority of the board members. That would be a serial communication, and that's prohibited. But it can occur in any situation when any majority of the board members communicate about board business outside of a meeting. So it could be an email from board member X to board member Y, and then board member Y and board member Z have a meeting together, and that discussion, that conversation flows through a majority of the board members. And it can occur even if the people who are communicating are intermediaries of the board. There are some outside communications that are not prohibited. If board members communicate with staff members to ask questions or obtain information, that's permitted under Bagley-Keene. Board members can also review written legal advice received by a majority of the state body. So they don't have to wait to review that legal advice for a public meeting to occur. And board members can attend a conference or other similar gathering with other board members And as long as the board members do not discuss board matters amongst themselves. Those are the types of outside communications that are permitted and not prohibited under Bagley-Keating. So that's the discussion that I wanted to give. I want to just pause real quickly if board members have questions about responsibilities under Bagley-Keating, then I'd also like to talk very briefly about the proper procedures for conducting board meetings. Just want to see if there's any hands raised. Okay. And also have opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So just very briefly talking about the proper procedures for board members, wanted to talk about parliamentary procedures, the process of making a motion, of discussing a motion, of voting on a motion, and some of the smaller motions that don't require all of those formal procedures, but can be proceed through unanimous consent. So parliamentary procedures, this board is governed by Robert's Rules of Order, the parliamentary procedures that govern most meetings or many meetings. They govern how meetings should be conducted through the use of formal motions. It allows for structured conversation and collaboration. It's more formal than a conversation. The goal is to try to foster communication and collaboration through the use of formal motions. The parliamentary procedures apply both to meetings of the full board, like the one that we're in right now, and to subcommittee meetings as well. So board members have, I think all board members have made motions, have entertained motions on this board to date, but to give an understanding of the steps of making a motion, the way that it works is that board members introduce an action item or proposal for consideration, and we heard one earlier. I move to adopt the minutes of the November board meeting. The co-chair who's conducting the meeting or the subcommittee meeting restates the motion and asks for a second. There's a motion to adopt the minutes of the November board meeting. Is there a second? Another board member must second the motion, and if that motion is not seconded, then the motion fails and will not be discussed. If it is seconded, then the co-chair will then restate the motion again and ask whether there is any additional discussion or debate on the motion. Do any board members wish to discuss or to debate the motion to adopt the minutes of the November board meeting? So for the purposes of discussion or debate of the motion, and I understand obviously a motion to adopt the minutes doesn't necessarily draw discussion, but if there is discussion, the way that it works is that the board member who is making the motion is entitled to speak first. And then in an ideal scenario, the discussion would then allow for an opportunity for all board members to speak before a board member is recognized to speak again. And that way, the goal is to ensure that all members who want to speak on the motion have the opportunity to do so before another board member gives a response to the discussion, that sort of thing. The discussion continues until the co-chair determines there will be no further discussion, or if a member moves to close discussion, and that can happen if a board member moves to close the discussion. That motion would require another member to second, and that motion to close discussion requires a 2/3 vote rather than a simple majority. There are some motions that can be amended. And we had some of the recommendations last year that are recommended, that were amended, excuse me. Some of the recommendations last year were amended. Procedures very similar. Board member moves that the motion is amended. The co-chair who's responsible for conducting the meeting calls for a second. If that motion to amend is seconded, then there's a discussion on the amendment. The amendment is then discussed and voted on. And if the amendment passes, the co-chair returns to the main motion as amended for further discussion. So when we have an amended motion, there's a little bit of an additional opportunity to discuss the motion, to discuss whether or not the motion should be amended first. And then if it is amended, then we discuss whether or not the amended motion should be should be for any further discussion on the amended motion. And of course, if the amended motion fails, then that amendment fails, but then the discussion returns to the original motion that was on the table before the amendment was introduced. In terms of voting, ending discussion on a motion, once the discussion is ended, the co-chair conducting the meeting will direct Department of Justice staff to perform a roll call vote. And that happened in the motion to adopt the November meeting minutes. DOJ staff then repeats the motion before calling on board members to vote. Board members vote aye, no, or abstain. And that happened in the motion that was on the table with regards to the November meeting minutes. DOJ staff then announces the number of ayes, noes, and abstentions, and then the co-chair calls the vote whether the motion passes or fails. There are some motions that don't need that formal process, smaller motions, minor matters, matters where there's no opposition that's to be expected. And for example, I think one of the most obvious ones is to end the meeting. So most of the time there is no opposition to ending the meeting at the appointed time. And in that situation, the co-chair conducting the meeting just simply repeats the request, and upon hearing no objections to that request, can pass the motion. So, but these are for minor matters. These are matters that don't anticipate discussion, opposition, objection. We have prepared a chart which we can that we can publish and post after this meeting, the types of motions that that come up in these proceedings, and the types of things that need to occur for those motions, whether or not they need to be seconded, whether or not those motions are open for discussion, whether they can be amended, and the particular vote count that's required to pass that motion, and also whether or not they can be rescinded or reconsidered. In terms of broad takeaways, I wanted to give this refresher to make sure that the board has all the information it needs. When the board meets to gather information or deliberate or make a decision, Bagley-Keene Act requires that the public have a seat at the table. And serial communications, serial meetings conducted outside of a public meeting are prohibited because they frustrate the Act's goals of transparency and violate the law. There are some exceptions to communication to discussion about board business outside of a public noticed meeting. Again, board members can contact staff to ask questions or gather information about an upcoming item, as long as the board member and staff don't communicate those conversations with other members outside of a properly noticed meeting. And the rule of thumb is that when a member receives information from staff, please do not communicate with other members about this information. Do not reply all to emails. But board members can communicate individually with members of the public and are encouraged to do so, to share the work of the board. And in those communications, board members indicate whether the views that they've expressed are their own, or that they are the views of the board. And the board members obviously encouraged to have those communications, have those conversations with members of the public, and listen to the comments that the members of the public have. So that ends the communication, that ends the discussion. I thank you so much for any questions that you might have. If there are no questions, I can turn it back over to the board. All right.
I don't see any raised hands. Alex, thank you so much. Really appreciate the updates and the presentation. It's a really helpful refresher for us. I think if you could provide that one slide that you discussed, that could be really helpful. So very much appreciate it. And I just, as part of this agenda item, I just do want to open it up to our board members if anybody has any comments, observations, or questions regarding any of both this presentation, but also the updates that Alex provided regarding the issuance of our last annual report in this last January, or of the CARE community briefing that recently occurred after the issuance of that report. So I don't want to give anybody a chance if anybody has any thoughts or comments or questions about any of those items.
Hello? Can you hear me, Angela?
Yes.
All right. Yeah, I just want to say thanks, Alex, for the time and preparation that went into providing that overview. I think it's very helpful to have a refresher on Bagley Keene and other operational aspects of our collaboration together. I think that the added clarity can help us work together in a way that's effective and efficient. So just want to acknowledge that. Thanks a lot, Alex.
Thank you. Okay. Well, seeing no other hands, we are now on agenda item. We just finished number 5. So we have a short break, 20 minutes. So we can turn off our cameras, and why don't we get back on at 11:25? Then we'll continue with our meeting. See everybody in a bit.
Hey everyone, this is Yasmin Manners from the DOJ team. It's 11:25 and I do want to ask that all the board members that are present, please turn on your cameras just so we can know who is here to establish quorum and reconvene the meeting.
Okay, well, welcome back, everyone. I'm going to take the second half of the agenda and facilitate the agenda items 7 through 12. Department of Justice, do we have quorum to proceed?
I'm double checking that right now. I think we do, but let me just confirm.
Yasmin, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I'm confirming to see if we do have quorum.
You're
I
still
believe
muted.
we do. Oh,
But
I
you
can
can
hear
give
you.
me a
No,
thumbs
I
up
can
if we
hear.
have
I can
I
hear.
can
quorum,
hear.
or a thumbs down if we don't.
Oh, we can hear
Okay.
you. Yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, so we are going to turn to a discussion of the plans for the 2026 report. We have heard from the committees and some excellent reports and really great thinking about what the work of the report could be going forward. And I think one of the things that we can do as a board is pull these things together into a theme. And there seemed to be a natural convergence of topics that people were sharing. And I guess at first blush, I'd love to hear from board members if you have a way to think about those topics together as a single theme that we can attach everything into. That would be welcome. I heard a lot about hotspot policing and its impact and consequences on communities of color, in particular Black and Brown, the anatomy of hotspot policing and its effects on public trust and other issues. But I welcome any thoughts people have around how we might pull all this together in a single theme, just as an initial conversation. If you want to continue to think about that, that's okay. Angela, I didn't know if you had any thoughts, having heard the reports
Sure.
out.
Yes. I first of all, kind of on a broader level, I really like the idea of continuing from last year's report, working toward a theme. I think, our theme last year of racial profiling and youth really made our report, very focused and very impactful. And I really thought that that moving forward, to the extent that we can continue to work with a theme among the various topics and subcommittees, to the extent possible. I mean, because we are always going to be looking at civilian complaints, but there could be a subset that in addition to the broader question, can also be focused on our theme. So I'm very much in favor of that, as well as I think it really helps us focus on what presenters to invite to our board meetings and subcommittee meetings to be very focused on those issues. And this idea of the hotspot policing, I'm really intrigued by that, because I feel like from our last report, we have been talking about, for several reports, but very much on the last report, bringing up what are some potential systemic issues that are leading to racial and identity profiling, both the impact of those systemic policies as well as, their relationship with our issue, which is profiling. So I think, thinking of it in that way, and we have heard from, like, as you mentioned, this subcommittees on the hot spot policing, that is somewhat of a broad issue, but yet focused. And it sounds as though, and Lily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like based on some of the new data points that we have, that, this new data that we are going to be able to work with could very much help us in that endeavor, were we to focus on the issue. And if we're looking at an anatomy of a hotspot policing, we can be bringing in speakers about, why law enforcement does have policies that are related to hotspot policing, and we can look at the pros and cons in addition to its relationship with racial profiling. So yeah, I'm very much in favor, and it sounds like that could very well be a good topic that brings up already some of the work that the subcommittees are doing. But I'd be interested from our data subcommittee if there is some additional data that would be helpful in this regard.
I guess, first of all, I thought that last year's report was really strengthened by having a focus on youth, and it's ideal to have a theme. I also, though, I think it's maybe challenging this year to come with a single overriding focus. And if different subcommittee members are thinking of sub themes, like if we can't, there's the overarching theme of public safety, of course, throughout everything that we do. And so I have to admit, before this meeting, I was kind of wrestling with exactly that. I was thinking, is there something that we could hone in on? And I this moment don't have the answer, but I hope this discussion will lead us in some particular directions. I do want to say the term hotspot, sometimes I hear used in different ways. A police agency might say, we've identified a hotspot in a community. And I want to clarify that I think that the data subcommittee was really looking at as agency or regional practices within the state, where it's clear that the policies are somehow our practices, policing practices, are different, and it's creating. So this term hotspot is sort of evocative, but it's since it's been used in different ways in different aspects of looking at police practices, I wonder if we could find some term of art that would create a good umbrella. I see Board Member Diallo. I see your hand up.
Yeah.
Sure. Yes. Thank you. To the extent that there are kind of an overarching themes that have been a thread through the committee reports, I'm particularly interested in, just as a broader concept, which I think when you drill down could relate to, things like hotspot policing. Just the concept, we deal this inherently in the RIPA board, but the issues related to public responsiveness and public trust, both at the department level in terms of addressing community concerns about public safety, and to the extent that those concerns are not being adequately reflected in the department responsiveness, and to the extent that the ways that departments, either through explicit policies or training and the way things are implemented throughout police departments, both undermine the public confidence and trust, and result in disparities in things like hotspot policing as a result of these type of policies. So unpacking things like hotspot policing, for example, to the extent that hotspot policing is, from a departmental level, maybe argued as a result of community responsiveness to public safety, how, there's a tension between maybe, an attempt to meet that responsiveness, but then again, undermining public trust by those policies that ultimately don't further the goals because, to the extent that they have racial identity profiling embedded in those policies, ultimately don't, despite efforts to try to, engender public confidence and trust, undermine that. So I think it's appropriate, especially in a time where there's, kind of a focus on public responsiveness to public safety issues, the implementation of both department policies and training that is supposed to be in responsiveness to that, but yet undermines that at the same time. And to the extent there's a false choice between responding to public safety and ensuring unbiased and trustful police conduct in the community.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just note I feel like the theme that came out of the policy subsection captures this. So we talked about a broad theme of how to foster public safety in particularly in Black and brown communities. So that as the theme, and understanding the environmental and other factors that undermine actually being safe and feeling safe, and trying to understand how to address that. So to me, that the things that we've just talked about can fall under that hotspot policing and the ways in which that undermines feelings of safety, and then how to address that. Public responsiveness and what that actually looks like in practice, and understanding whether is that fostering a sense of safety or is that undermining a sense of safety in those communities. So I just want to throw out there again the theme that has come out of the policy subcommittee as a broad theme under which a number of issues could be explored, including the ones that have been proposed.
Yeah, thank you for offering that. I think that that resonates with me. How does it resonate with others? Or do you have any additional thoughts?
Hey, folks. I think the broad category of thinking about the relationship between policing practices and safety is good. I think it's particularly timely, especially given the moment right now that we're in, where there's significant public concerns about safety and the best ways to address it. Right? We all saw that Prop 36 passed, and it gives rise to a variety of implications. And, more generally, I think there's probably, for some folks, a presumption that policing practices are inherently connected to driving safety. However, when we look at a lot of the research and what the data show within the context of this board, I think the reality undermines that to various extents. So given that general context in which we're currently operating, I think that broad category that was offered up makes sense. And I think it is, the scope of it is sufficient where we could have a variety of more particular or nuanced topics fit within that in a way that is cohesive and doesn't cabin our ability to tap in or hone in on particular subtopics, including, and I do like the idea of the geographic focus of some parts of the analysis too. I do agree with the idea from board member Kajabi of maybe we think about defining what we mean by hotspot, just so that there's a shared understanding amongst board members, and then that we're communicating it in a way that doesn't unintentionally replicate connotations of like hotspot that may not be what we're really trying to aim for, right? So that's my initial 2 cents on the overall big picture idea.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other thoughts?
I'll just say,
Oh, go ahead, Rich. Sorry.
I just wanted to say briefly that I agree with the last three comments. So ones made by board members Smith, Kajabi, and Dobar.
Great. Lily, did you want to add?
I just wanted to, circle back that I do think this theme of public safety it's broad in a way that could serve us well for so many of the themes that come up. I was recalling that an idea that's been that was raised in meetings in particular last year was also to look at what recommendations our legislatively or recommendations of the board and so on have happened and what their status is maybe in the state. And so I just wanted to put that back on the table. Those were the main two comments I wanted to make. Thank you.
Great. Anyone else want to come forward from the board? Okay, well, it's sounding like how to foster public safety could be a thread that allows us to connect the issues that were mentioned. Maybe there's some refining of what all those things are to streamline the report, but I think we're off to a good start with that as a theme. And I want to call your attention to a document that was included in the board materials, which is an outline of the RIPA report 2026. That document was generated out of the discussions that were being had by the different committees. So it might be a little outdated because some conversations have happened since. But I wanted us to take a look at that, and we have this idea now around a possible theme. If that then informs what we could focus on in these different sections, hearkening back to the reports that were given to us at the first part of this meeting. And so we welcome any thoughts on any of these, and perhaps John, I could call on you to help us think about the policy section, because in many ways the other parts of the report are in service to that section. You gave a great report and we don't have that in front of us, but if you could help us think about what you shared in your report and how that might translate into an outline here. Whether this is reflective of those things or there's anything we would want to add or subtract.
Yes, so at least in the state and local policy section, it is generally reflective of what I mentioned verbally. So you can see this theme of increasing public safety in Black and Brown communities. And then it has elements of a healthy and thriving community. So that could be more specifically about what does research tell us that leads to communities being safe and folks in those communities feeling safe. And then evolution of racial profiling. And then so you see sections B2 and B3 start to go into discussions of those things that undermine safety. And so that's what you see there. So generally reflective. as I mentioned, the longitudinal analysis that we will hear back from DOJ about that. But there's also a question about whether or not that even gets included in this report versus ends up being something else. But folks should take a look at this, and again, I welcome folks to say how this might resonate and how you might see this as being a broader theme for the report overall. But as I said, generally this reflects what I mentioned. And so the idea, just to put a fine point on it, the idea is that what you see in B is the general theme, and then we're trying to think of elements that help elaborate on that more general theme.
Yeah, thank you, John. Lily, if you don't mind sharing your thoughts, because you all had a lot of thoughts around the stop data thing. Some of them are reflected in the policy section, but that is very thin in the outline. I'm wondering if you could re-up some things that you mentioned before.
Yeah, thank you for that opportunity. I do also see some hands that have gone up, so I don't know if I'm happy to circle back. In particular, I don't know if any hands that were going up, like for example, Chauncey, you're on this subcommittee, the data subcommittee. Do we have a little more discussion then circle? Is that okay? And then take on the data
sure.
more squarely? Okay.
Could I
so
just
where I see Manju. Go ahead, Manju.
Yeah, thank you. Just because my comment was to John's review of the policy section. I wanted, and this is a minor point, but if we could add a little bit of history and analysis to the piece on the broken windows, policies in the past, because I think even now there continues to be, as I see it, misinformation about perceived successes of that broken windows policy in, say, New York. And I think there needs to be, I think before we talk about it in California, it would be good to provide an accurate historical perspective and analysis on whether it worked or not and what the consequences and impacts of it were. I know we've done that in some of our past reports, is sharing historical information from other regions of the country. So I thought it might be useful here as well. Thanks.
Yeah, and just for context, the RIPA reports have provided some historical analysis of broken window policing in the past. So we could re-up it, we could update it, we could refresh it. Yes, Chauncey.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So there's a couple things I'd like to highlight here that fit within the larger theme that we're talking about on public safety and communities of color. One of them arose within the context of the Civilian Complaints and Accountability Subcommittee, and it's specifically Roman numeral 5C, which says civilian oversight. I think this dovetails nicely also into the policies piece, and here's why. So throughout California, there's a variety of civilian oversight entities at the local level for law enforcement agencies. Most folks here probably are aware of that. Some do have them, some don't. And then the ones that do, the policies and practices that may apply within that particular jurisdiction may vary from a jurisdiction that's neighboring or somewhere else across the state. As a result, what I've heard from the field is varying degrees of efficacy when it comes to actual accountability for a law enforcement agency or officer wrongdoing, depending on where a person may reside. As a result, that leads to significant inequities in terms of a individual community members' ability to have their particular concerns redressed, and also ensure that safety is being carried out in a way that's equitable throughout the state. So what I'm thinking here is both, it's under accountability, but I also think it dovetails into policy, is that it would be helpful to have some form of a landscape analysis of civilian oversight entities throughout the state, so that we can develop some form of best practices for local jurisdictions to consider, or it goes through the state legislature, but through the state legislature down to local jurisdictions to consider as they go about the process of establishing civilian oversight entities if they already have them, refining the different protocols in place, and so forth. So, and thinking about the overall theme once again of safety and trying to advance safety, I think that's an important idea to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Chauncey. So I have the luxury of having been on the RIPA board for a long time, along with Angela and a few others. So I can share that at one of our reports, we actually did that. We did a landscape of the oversight bodies, all the kinds of oversight bodies that exist in California, and we sort of did that landscape analysis. I don't recall which report that was, but it was pretty expansive, and it was a focus of the report. So perhaps in thinking about our theme, we could think about what would be additive to what we've already shared out with the public. We could refer to that report so that we can make sure, re-up some of the information, make sure people are aware of it, and then think about what more do we need to know right now relative to the theme. There's been so much information. We have these like 300 to 500 page reports. It'd be great if we had like a chart of in each report what we were focusing on, because I think it's hard for all of us to just remember and keep that straight. Thank you. Lily, did you want to add?
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to circle back, especially the outline as it stands. We're very early in the process, but in particular, the Stop Data Subcommittee meeting was very recent relative to the close in time into this meeting, so there was less opportunity to flesh out details in the outline. I wanted to first say that this was raised earlier, I think, Board Member Guerrero, that I agree that the data section I think of as in service to the other sections and to the goals of the board overall. And I also would advocate for a focus on analysis, the data analysis that really not only brings something to people's attention and gives us a way to look at the situation, but also points directly to policy changes, recommendations that can be made, or recognizes changes that may have happened if that's the case, so that we choose topics that can point to then possible recommendations. Let me say that more strongly, points to change that can happen. And so if I could swing back a little bit to our subcommittee, there are many points that were highlighted, and DOJ is going to look into the feasibility of these topics. But the first one was this idea of focusing on regions and agencies to identify. I think I want to avoid the word hotspot here, because that's been often used by different agencies in a very specific way. So I don't know what our coinage would be, but to use the data, identify regions or agencies with, heavy practices. This is not the term we want to use, but in other words, places where maybe searches are happening at a much higher rate, or searches with consent as the only basis. I'm not always able to keep track of the chat here, but I did notice places with high disparities pop up. So thank you for that. Chauncey, I see your hand up. Do you want to add to that? And then we can go through these items. I'm sorry, I think you need to unmute. Thank you so much.
Feel free to continue. I'm going to talk about something else. So,
okay, that's great. That's great. Thank you. So using the data, now we have statewide data for more than a year to identify particular regions of interest. Another thing that was new in our data this year is to be able to very clearly separate out vehicle, pedestrian, and cyclist citations and or not citations, sorry, stops, but in particular in Southern California, some news agencies did analyses and they saw cyclists were being cited at highly disparate rates with respect to race and ethnicity. And so wherever our focus lies, I think it's going to be very important this year to see if, in fact, the experience of those driving vehicles, those on bicycles and pedestrians are very different. I think that is more of a point for our subcommittee members in direct work with DOJ than something that the board needs to analyze as a whole right now. And then I want to focus on the use of consent. Although we've looked at that in the past, I think we've looked at it in a way that it needs to continue to be a through line. It's an area where we do see very disparate practices. It's also an area where officers have a lot of discretion at their disposal. And theme in past meetings has been that particular note are areas where officers have a good deal of discretion. Those may be places where we can make more change. And also what I'll just want to remind us that something that's new this year is indicating that how consent was demonstrated. And so whether it was verbal, written, or there's also this category of deemed, call it implicit, the officers deeming that it was implicitly granted. And so if I were to swing back to an outline, I'm not exactly sure where consent should lie, but I think this is a very important area that we need to have a focus. And all of these fall, of course, under an umbrella of public safety broadly. One that ties very directly to public safety, and I think Board Member Dobard, you actually raised explicitly too, was, and it certainly was part of at least our subcommittee recommendation, was looking at vehicle pursuits, car crashes, or fatalities. And that may not be explicit in the RIPA, the data that's collected as mandated by RIPA, but that's come up in discussion in a number of subcommittees. And so I could see that, whether that lies on, if that becomes part of the report, maybe it's under the data section, maybe it's under the policies section, but that was raised in a number of subcommittees. I want to mention one item that, thank you, Board Member Dobard, for including this in the outline, the longitudinal analysis, and in particular LAPD and SFPD. It may be that CHP also, that's an agency for which we have data for many, many years now, and we may see different practices among those agencies, as we've had speakers come in the past to highlight, in particular around pretextual stops and consent searches. I guess I don't want to just keep sort of listing categories, but I wanted to elevate those particular ones that came out of the subcommittee discussion.
Great. Chauncey, did you want to chime in?
Echo the sentiment by Board Member Kajabi. I was also in those conversations, and those ideas bubbled up and resonated well. There's one topic that was discussed, and I think there was some energy around within the context of the stop data, as well as the accountability section, that I think also would fit within the overall umbrella of increasing community safety, particularly in Black and Brown communities. It ended up being left out of the outline because of some like procedural nuances and making sure that things are noticed in a timely manner, but it was substantively discussed, and there was some energy around it. And that's specifically the topic of one of the most damaging aspects to community safety that arises from the context of police stops, and that's fatal police car chases. I think many of us has probably seen, recently or sometime in the recent past, a lot of instances in which there's high-speed pursuits of everyday people, and all too often, what ends up happening is someone ends up dying, whether it's the driver of the car that the officer's trying to stop, perhaps a passenger. It could be the officer involved or their partner, or even just as alarming, if not more, a bystander, right? Someone who's just kind of going about their everyday life, not involved in the stop, and ends up being killed because they're hit either by one of the cars, right? And there's been recent reports throughout the nation which show that all too often these fatal police car chases arise from stops for relatively minor traffic violations, and that there's a significantly racially disproportionate impact. Specifically, national data show that Black people are 4 times more likely than white people to die from a fatal police car crash. And then on top of that, bystanders are the people who are killed in approximately 1/3 of fatal police car chases. And so what I did in thinking about this, because this topic to me seemed very, very problematic, right? You have these car chases happening, racially disparate outcomes. The consequences for public safety are significant because it's actually resulting in deaths, and then they're arising from relatively minor things. So, I took a quick look just to see what's going on within the landscape on this particular topic, to think about what could potentially happen. And it seems as though the general thrust in the landscape is to try to address this topic at the state level if possible. So, for example, the state of Washington recently passed a law that significantly curtailed the ability for police car chases to occur when they arise from relatively minor traffic situations. And then both the Federal Department of Justice and the Police Executive Research Forum have issued a report with recommendations for trying to address this topic. So we talked about this in greater detail within the context of a couple subcommittees. And for whatever reason, there was some procedural nuances in terms of posting documents online. It didn't get added to the outline. So I would like to see if we can go ahead and add that as one of the topics within the context of this overall discourse about public safety in Black and Brown communities.
Any other thoughts? I appreciate this rich discussion about how the theme could connect to these really important questions, data queries, policy analyses. And I'm wondering if, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I just want to add 2 narrow comments. One is swinging back to looking at regions with high disparities. Just something that came out in subcommittee discussion is that this isn't so much necessarily about stops, but about what happens once a stop is initiated. So search practices and other impacts of the policing. So that's a little narrow comment, but just echoing past discussion. And then also something to come up in past meetings was looking at the coinage. I think, Remember Guerrero, you call this the life cycle of a stop. And I'm wondering if maybe it's something we return to later, but it might be that that's a useful framing for within some section. Yeah, just a small comment.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So it would be great to hear from folks from the Civilian Complaints Committee. Lawana, if you're on, if you want to reflect on whether the outline includes what you shared from your committee report, what you thought was important You shared specifically some legislative suggestions, which we could ask DOJ to build in. Yeah, I'm not sure Luana, are you on?
Yes, I am on.
Okay, great.
We just want to emphasize and make sure that we do have a clear understanding with our recommendation regarding these youth and their stops. We want to make sure that our recommendation is looked at as SB2, which is new. We just started it last year, but we want to make sure that that form that they're using does look at the youth ages, at not just at youth, anyone who's being stopped. We need to know the ages, especially when it comes to our minors. Also, we again with legislation recommendation also regarding the youth. It's very important because our youth are having contact with law enforcement, and we don't know if it's good or bad, and we don't even know how often this is happening. And so we need the data. And so we're recommending that legislation puts it into, I think it was 1.3, what was the number that we were looking at that we needed it to be put into legislation? 13510.8 is very important because some law enforcement will do it and some won't. And it's very important that we do get this data. It makes it safe for all, because if you as a youth have a bad encounter with law enforcement, I'm not saying all encounters with law enforcement with youth are bad, but if it does happen like that, we need to know, and they need to know who they can contact too, that their voices can be heard too, that they have rights, because sometimes as a youth, you may not think that you have a right and that anyone's going to listen. And so it needs to be put into legislation, and we need posts to assist in putting that into their requirement. Also, we were talking about some of the things that happen are maybe out of those 9 categories that posts look at when doing decertifications. And so we need for them to look at other categories too. But those categories we want, before they start picking categories, we want the community to have input on those categories. Just like Board Member Smith was just talking about, we need to look at that with these car chases to see what is happening with those. And that should be included in this category, because I don't think it's included in the 9 categories. So those were just our recommendations.
Yeah, thank you for adding those. Any other thoughts around civilian complaints, policies, stop data? We've heard a little bit about accountability as well. And we've also heard a little bit about post. Is there anything that you think should be added that hasn't already been said, either through the committee reports or through this conversation?
I just want to make sure we know that all interaction with law enforcement is not always negative, and that we need to get some of our youth to have this interaction with them so they can see the positive. So it's very important. So when law enforcement do stop, and they can say, hey, I just stopped them just to say hi, or just to make sure they were doing okay. But we need to know the contact that they are having with law enforcement.
Thank you, Luana. Manju.
So I just wanted to share in terms of that 6B under the post training section of the outline, where it says topics to be included. These were the ones that I mentioned in my report. So a review of the published post guidelines, the analysis of post response to our report recommendations last year, part 1 of the field training program review, and lastly, and this is obviously section C, recommendations to the legislature and to post.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Yeah, my hope is that DOJ will absorb the committee report information as well as things that are getting picked up in this conversation. Yeah. Welcome, Board Member Randolph. Would you like to add to the discussion?
Yes, I would. Thank you so much, Ms. Lawanda, for focusing and bringing up the statement that not all law enforcement contact with youth is negative. Okay, I'm glad that she has actually highlighted that. And that's one thing that we have to continue to focus on us as a RIPA board, because all I'm hearing is it's all negative here. And that's why I'm going to be probably a little bit more quiet now, and not voicing what's really what I'm really thinking about. But one thing I would like to add, a couple things. So we talked about the pursuit policy. I'm glad Chauncey highlighted people dying in pursuits for somebody who's been involved in that. Absolutely, I totally agree with you. And it is a national issue. And we have really started to come around on it. If anyone has advanced that as far as pursuit policies, it's the state of California. But one thing I would like to add is in a pursuit, if I turn on those lights, I'm getting ready to pull someone over. I don't know the ethnicity of that driver. 50-60% of that time. That's one thing I'd like to add on that one. The other ones, the other comment about Lawanda commenting about youth and knowing their rights. With California as the pioneer with juvenile law, and juveniles have got a lot of protections in our state. SB 203 and SB 439 now prohibit questioning of youth, whether it's at a school or out on the streets, or without them being allowed to have a lawyer or having their parents present. There's a lot of protections, and I was hoping DOJ would have commented on that. And then the other thing I would like to add is, now that I am a chief of a K through 12 police department, the new push right now I know I'm doing for my agency is positive contacts. And I have brought that up. The last 2 board meetings, the last 2 reports, that positive contacts should be documented, and it just fell on deaf ears. So I'm glad, Lawanda, you keep bringing it up. I think positive contacts, my officers are doing it now, and a lot of agencies are doing it. Positive contacts with youth, whether it's little Johnny asking about becoming a police officer to Janie learning how to get her driver's permit. I think that's phenomenal, and those documents and those contacts mean so much. And I would like to throw out for Department of Justice, because this has came up in several of my meetings, interviews with chiefs, is that phone calls have came in from the Department of Justice, I don't know at what level, inquiring with chiefs. Usually the agencies I'm looking at is 50 below, and I'm getting ready to do a statewide query on it through PORAC of agencies inquiring about their stats and their data, and their numbers are down. Inquiring why are the numbers down, there's a lot of anomalies that are being forced right now with some chiefs, and that has came to me, and I do want this board to know that that is now circulating in the state. So I do have plans to have a deeper conversation with the Department of Justice. This is just in the last year. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chief Randolph. And, I think the importance of analyzing the data over trend lines is going to be really important, because for you and me and those who have been here longer, we've seen numbers rise and fall, things like the pandemic. There are external factors that have affected our data, and it's important to contextualize and understand what's going on. So I think it is important for Department of Justice to be engaging with law enforcement to understand what those, what might be going on in the data, as we have seen big swings in data over time. And the only way we can understand that is to talk to the data collectors to understand what's going on. So let's see, is there anyone here we haven't heard from on the board?
Good afternoon. Just regarding the bikes and pedestrian stops and the citations, if we're looking at the stops and contacts, also we'd like to look at corresponding crash data in those areas. As we have seen, at least with the highway patrol, a big uptick in pedestrian and bicycle fatalities or injury crashes. And then, of course, what follows that is the further enforcement. So I would like to, if we could look at, if we're going to look at one, let's look at both, please.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Chauncey.
Thanks. Appreciate that comment, Darren. Two things. So one is within the disaggregation based on the cycling pedestrian, are we also including, I can't recall what was discussed in the subcommittee, but also people riding on public transportation? Was Board Member Kajabi, was that also part, or someone from the DOJ, is that also part of the new
I think,
available data?
Yeah, I'm sure DOJ could speak with more authoritatively, but I understand pedestrian to be a category that means not a vehicle, not a bicycle. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would be include all public transportation.
Oh yeah,
Right.
yeah. I should say vehicle. I've understood to mean that's a vehicle that the person who stopped themselves was driving. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks. DOJ, just a point of clarification. I'm wondering if that is, if public transportation is captured, it could also be part of the disaggregation, either as a pedestrian stop or as something on its own. The only reason I ask is because in Los Angeles, particularly, and I know in other areas that have public transportation to a significant degree, there's a lot of reports about racially disparate stops occurring within those spaces. But if they're aggregated within the context of another type of stop, whether it's viewed as pedestrian because they're on foot, or whether it's viewed as on a vehicle because they're technically on a train or a bus, I'm just wondering if we could, if that information is being captured in a specific way or not. If so, it would be good to have that level of analysis also.
And Chauncey, yeah, so I think one of the challenges here is going to be that that transit officers, like the municipal transit system in San Diego, for example, they're not peace officers subject to RIPA law. So they're not doing stop data collection because they're not classified. What's that?
I'm talking about officers.
Police?
Yes.
You're talking about police as
Correct.
opposed to transit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in Los Angeles, LA Metro, they have a contract with 3 law enforcement agencies to conduct stops: LAPD, Long Beach Police Department, and the Sheriff's Department, and they ride on public transportation and do stops.
Okay, well, DOJ, if you want to address that question that Chauncey has.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Member Smith. And just to clarify and confirm, public transit is included in the pedestrian stop section of the data elements.
Thank you. Is it kind of all in one, or is it possible to disaggregate it? I mean, this is a little bit more nuanced we could talk about in the subcommittee, but I'm just wondering because the topic came up.
I'm not sure if we can disaggregate it. That's something that we can raise with our research services section and see if that is a possibility. And we can report back to you in the stop data subcommittee about whether that's a possibility.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay. Any last board member Randolph?
I can't hear you, Chief.
Thanks, Chauncey. I'm glad Board Member Chauncey is doing a deeper dive on the transportation system. I understand. I wish DOJ, Jasmine, I wish we would just lay it out right now. The 105 or 110 transportation systems in the state of California, not all of them have law enforcement, and not all of them would have interactions the way LA does, the three agencies which do share that county. So, I mean, it would not be appropriate numbers to compare. It's apples to oranges. I mean, San Diego, Andrea, I didn't know. I thought San Diego was on the transportation system down there. Thank you for clarifying that. But LA, yeah, LA does have an elaborate system, and yeah, three agencies share that jurisdiction. But the rest of them throughout the state, I mean, BART and San Francisco, I mean, out of 105, including the federal side, it just wouldn't be fair numbers. It's just apples to oranges. So that was all.
Okay, well, it sounds like DOJ is going to dig into that to better understand what information could be pulled regarding transportation-related, public transit-related stops. I am watching the clock, and I do want to make sure we leave room for the additional agenda items. So I give one last chance for anyone who hasn't spoken yet. Okay. All right. Then looking back at our agenda, we now have an opportunity to discuss public engagement and how we can increase public engagement in these meetings. Part of that question is whether we should have an in-person meeting. We had more engagement in the past when we had in person. It's just a question to throw out there, or if there are other ideas about how to increase public engagement. As part of the first generation of the RIPA board, we just had orders of magnitude more public engagement. It was a different time. It was the before time, before the pandemic. Things have changed a lot since. So, maybe in person wouldn't work now, but are there other ideas that we can bring forward about how to increase public engagement in these really important and rich conversations? We appreciate the members of the public who are with us consistently. But what more can we do to bring people into the conversation? Manju.
I actually have a question. Can you explain, since I wasn't here in the before times, what exactly happened? Like, did people come to the individual locations, public locations? And when you say order of magnitude, or can you give some numbers of like the past versus present, what we've been seeing the last few years? That would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so it was one location. We all came together. We all traveled to come to one location. Members of the public also traveled if they weren't from the region. We rotated geographically where those meetings were. And on the regular, we would have at least 50 people, upwards of over 100, depending on the topic and the location. Lawanda.
Yes, thank you. My suggestion and recommendation, because I know we have the meetings during the week, Monday through Friday, early in the day, but a lot of the people that I associate with, they work Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. Unfortunately, I'm thankful that they do have a job Monday through Friday from 9 to 5. So they're not able to participate or listen in or hear any of this. My suggestion and recommendation is that we have community meetings on the weekend so the community can be involved and actually hear what's actually going on, because right now they're totally disconnected because of the times that we're having this. And it's not allowing them to really have their voices. And so if we can do a couple of community meetings throughout the year on the weekend or in the evening to allow different people to have different perspectives and have input. That's my suggestion.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Chauncey.
All right. So last year we had, hello?
Yes.
All right. So last year there was a meeting or two that we had with the full board that I participated in, where there was comments from members of the public, I believe, and specifically I can recall, it was Cephas Johnson out of the Bay Area, bringing this as an issue of concern for him, talking about how RIPA board meetings used to be in person at some point, and as a result of going completely virtual, it has decreased opportunities for members of the public to be meaningfully engaged with the board. So when I heard that, it became something that I thought was valuable enough for the board to consider, because we're hearing about it from a community member that was interested and wanted to be more participatory. However, that was his perspective, that whatever structures we have in place, we're limiting his ability and that of others to participate. And I think that since we are a public body in general, we should lean in towards transparency and trying to increase political participation, particularly when it comes to issues of racial equity and racial profiling, because it's so important to everyday folks. So I think that whether it's, what LaWanda offered up, thinking about alternative times or days that make our work more open and accessible to the public, I think that's a good idea. Potentially meeting in person at some point in the near future. I think probably things went away from in person as a result of COVID, but we're now somewhat removed from the peak of the pandemic. Perhaps that's something that we can revisit. And then also, another thing that I've seen within the context of similar bodies, not necessarily RIPA board itself, is just in the structure of the meetings, there could perhaps be more than one opportunity for public comment. So I've seen in the past in some spaces, they provide an opportunity for public comment both at the start of the meeting, right, for a brief period, and then also at the end. And I think that's particularly helpful for situations like this where the meeting is quite long, right? And if it doesn't fit with someone's schedule to step away from work for a 10-minute period, they're not even able to voice whatever they think. So the more opportunities for public engagement, the decrease in the barriers for their participation, I think would go a long way in making sure that the board is really living into the spirit of what gave rise to this, and will help us develop solutions that are responsive to what community members want to see happen.
Thank you. Chaving?
Yeah, I'm very reminding, I think like maybe 2 years ago, we had a in-person, which I couldn't make it in LA. What was the attendance in that meeting? The public attendance? Because that was after the pandemic, and it'd be good to kind of see if there was a increase in attendance when it came back in person. That being said, I think Chauncey's comment around the meetings being really long, it does put a barrier for how much commitment people can put the public can attend and take. And so in consideration, what are some of the options that we can think about in terms of the timing, and then also the duration of the meetings, so that the public doesn't feel like it's a large commitment to attend for the whole entire meeting, just to understand what's being discussed, and then how they can actually engage and make public comments. The other, I think one more point, the DOJ, and I know Chauncey actually did a presentation on our RIPA report in January for what are some other opportunities outside of the meetings for public to also see what the RIPA board does and what is on the report. It's a very long report. Most individuals are not gonna be able to read through everything. We also, as I'm talking to public members and even political friends who are well aware, I think there's also not a lot of knowledge about the RIPA board, even though they are very engaged in different policy spaces. And so what are some of the ways that we can actually be more visible as a Ripple board so that folks actually know that we exist?
Yeah. Thank you so much. DJ Kreiner.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to comment. Hey, Rich, what's up, bro? I will say this: we are in a very different time. I think it was already stated. So, even going back to in person is going to be a struggle because there are people that are now accustomed to being online. We deal with it when it comes to public gatherings, when it deals with church, when it deals with city hall meetings, commission meetings, and all the sort. I think offering a mixture of both is a great opportunity and slowly kind of migrating and pulling people back in instead of having maybe in person at all four of our gatherings, maybe two in person, two online, just to kind of get people back into the flow of traveling and doing things. We got to remember kind of the timing that we're in. I mean, it's a struggle to get people to come anywhere, right? To get them out their homes. I think the one positive that we can say is that when we do get back in person, I think we kind of have to stop and think, well, what is preventing people from getting online? Well, it's the distraction of when they're online, there are so many other multitude of things to do. When you're in person, your whole intention, your focus is at that gathering, at that place, and you're coming intentionally for that. I just think kind of getting people into the mindset of traveling and coming back together is vital and important. And I would hate for us to come back together and anticipate a 50 people person gathering or even a 20 and feel disappointed. Whenever we do this, look, team, let's just be ready. We may not get but 10 people on the first one, but that's a win, right? We haven't been together and really been together in over 3 or plus odd years, right? And then we slowly start building on those numbers by doing exactly what some of my colleagues have stated, getting the word out, kind of explaining what Ripper is all about, maybe spending a little bit of dollars on snail mailing, even more emailing, kind of putting that word out there. But maybe instead of doing it 4 times consecutively, maybe one time online, one in person, one online, one in person. I think that probably would help kind of gather that attention and then getting that importance. But also those that are online, seeing that we are engaged with each other. You know, when we're talking to each other, showing that level of engagement that we have with one another. Like when we hop on, I'm saying, hey, what's up, Rich? I'm saying, hey, what's up, Lawanda? Like actually looking as if a person wants to come together, because a lot of people don't want to travel if all they're going to do is travel and see hostility. It's important for what we're talking about, but it's also important to let them know that we as a team are operating as a team. We just may have different avenues of getting to our success. So those are 2 things I'll say, and I'll digress.
Oh, excellent. Suli Diallo.
Thank you. I want to echo those comments that Mr. Kreiner just stated. Having sort of many boards and struggling with this concept of in-person meetings versus meetings online, I think whatever system we come up with that allows the most amount of people to participate would be apt in different forms. Some people are real comfortable meeting online. That's much more convenient for them, especially with this form allows people to participate from all over the state. But, you know, then again, some people, be it technological difficulties or just uncomfortability with the forum, you know, the Zoom, you know, in some ways, if you kind of compare anybody who's had an in-person meeting versus an online meeting, there's a quality to the conversation sometimes that could be a bit stifling to some people, to where, you know, the more natural setting of an in-person meeting could, you know, increase their both willingness and also their to show up to the meetings, as well as their willingness to engage and participate. So I like that, the extent that we do hybrid things. I mean, maybe, you know, some online meetings, some meetings in person with geographic diversity, staggering times, maybe at least some meetings on the weekends versus the week, so that throughout our year, we at least give forums on different people to be able to participate and give their input into the report. But I don't think getting locked into any one kind of medium or form. I think we should kind of think broadly, because for every one situation, we may find that we're also excluding other people. It's, you know, throughout the course of the year, are we giving people opportunities to be able to participate in a variety of forms?
Right. Thank you. Well said, Manju.
So I just want to agree with that comment. from Board Member Diallo. On another commission that I sit on, the LA City Ethics Commission, we actually allow folks to join in person or by phone. And so I think making it accessible to in both ways has allowed for the most public engagement.
Great. And DJ Kreiner, I don't know if that's a new hand or an old hand.
Since I know you want me to keep talking, but as a preacher, you don't want that. It's an old hand.
Okay. All right. Lily Kajabi.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I really appreciate everything that was shared, and I think that, you know, an in-person meeting can, I don't know how to put it, can be more potent meeting with the community space that we create in every respect. Although it's a huge state, and being online has the potential to create access and accessibility that we wouldn't have otherwise. I'm wondering if we could circle to two pieces. One was creating a better space within the meetings for public comment and meaningful engagement, and the other was the idea of getting the word out. I know the meetings are publicly noticed, but are there ways that we could think about as board members to really connect more? I guess I would say I've fallen short on this front. I haven't been thinking as much about reaching out to make sure that organizations, people know about the meetings. And so maybe I was too passive in that regard. And so maybe that's something where we could all think really constructively and consciously. And in particular, I think I heard the idea of themes for a meeting. So if there were a meeting that were themed in a way that we thought would really engage particular constituencies, community members. So it's not just sending the notice out further and more broadly, but something that's more targeted. Just wanted to share those ideas. And maybe that means a listening session where we're really cultivating public engagement around particular topics. Thanks.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that makes me think of meetings where we've had presentations by experts come in, and those have been better attended than others. So just throwing that on the list. Also, you know, throwing just a few more ideas out on the list, and then Manju, I'll get to you. One is considering having a pre-meeting that's just like an open, capacity building for the community, so that they're prepared to be involved in the conversation, and they kind of get like prepped on what's going to be happening in the meeting. And I think somebody already mentioned community presentations on the work of RIPA and the data and the reports in a digestible way. And then also want to throw out interpretation. I know our organization works with a lot of non-English speakers that could potentially be involved, but we're not set up for interpretation. So just thinking about that, and maybe that's a regional thing that we could think about as if we move our meetings around the state. Those are some thoughts. Manju.
Thank you, Andrea. I appreciate the comment about the translation. I think that would be really important. One question I had is whether we could also move public comment to the beginning of the meeting so that folks would not have to wait until, many hours into it. So, again, on the other commission that I sit on, we do it immediately after the approval of the minutes. And so people can make their comments again in multiple different means, online, phone, and in person, and then they can leave and not have to stay for our entire meeting to do so. Thanks.
Thanks. Okay, well, in that spirit, let's turn to public comment. And so we will invite public comment, and I see people have been putting information and comments into the chat, but if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and I will recognize you. Karen.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Perfect. Good afternoon. My name is Karen. I'm a member of the public and a data analyst for a community organization. I just want to say that I'm very happy to hear that the RIPA board is in the process of developing a stop data dashboard. And I just wanted to reiterate the importance of this endeavor. As it stands, the data formats made available can be challenging for the average member of the public to navigate. So I do think a dashboard will go a long way to make the vast amount of stop data much more accessible for all. And if it's helpful to the board, I will include some links in the chat to some existing dashboards by the California Department of Education, Department of Finance, and Health and Human Services that could potentially serve as a starting point for what a data dashboard might look like. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All right. Is there another member of the public who would like to speak? Please raise your hand. The Jamaican.
This is very entertaining. I'm not amused by much of it. I'm not informed by any of it. It seems to me that if we may claim, and by we I mean members of this board, may assert that the data is so bad that the public would not stand for it if the public knew about it, I see no purpose in engaging the public in dealing with data that we, members of this board, the CADOJ, knows to be so highly faulty. Perhaps we are indulging in a form of self-delusion that we ought to have remedied. Now, with respect to the data from pretext stops, in the last meeting, I sought the help of the board, meaning the California Department of Justice specifically, in obtaining data on pretext stops for San Francisco. I've been after that data for more than 60 days. I have not been able to get that data. And it seems to me that because of my own illness, if you will, I have a feeling that the heavy hand of the California Department of Justice is behind my inability to get pretext stop data, because there is no legal basis for its refusal to provide the data or to delay it. Now, that is not something new, because the delay and the concealment of data is something that the CADOJ itself does. You may be wasting my time and your time doing these things, because many of us can see through these claims of transparency. They are deceitful, and I thank you.
Are there other members of the public who would like to speak, who have not yet spoken? Okay, see no other members of the public. We can turn to the next item, which is discussion and vote on action items. And I'm not sure that we have any action items, but DOJ, please, if you could chime in to help us understand if there's anything we need to take action on.
Sure. Thank you, Co-Chair Guerrero. There aren't any action items on the table currently, but for DOJ's understanding, if the board would like to confirm the direction for this year's report, as we understand it, the theme would be looking at ways to increase public safety with hotspot policing as a subtopic within that, as well as the topics that were discussed in the report outlines for each of the subcommittees. So on behalf of DOJ, it would be helpful to have affirmative direction if there's anything that differs from what I just repeated, or if there's anything in addition It would be great to know that now. And then the other item for consideration is whether there are any other steps the board would like to take in the meantime related to public engagement. I did want to flag on that note that the current standard for RIPA meetings being remote is currently set to expire at the end of this year. So as of January 1st next year, the meetings would return to in-person. But there is a chance that the legislature will extend the current rule, so the meetings may continue remotely. But as of now, they're scheduled to return to in-person. If there are any steps that the board members would like to take, or any items that we can look into for you ahead of the next subcommittee or full board meeting, please do let us know, and we can get started on that.
Thank you, Yasmin. I think that my understanding of the theme is, as you stated, how to foster public safety, ... and then bringing in all of the issues raised as components or elements of that broader theme. And so it would be great if DOJ could do some work to structure that, to take our many words and refine the outline based on this discussion. That would be really helpful. In terms of meeting format, thank you for letting us know that things could change next year just based on the legislative rules. But as I understand it, we could still consider doing in person if that made sense. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So it sounds like we had a lot of great and rich discussion today about the report, about ways in which we could increase public engagement. And perhaps it would be wise to then ask the Department of Justice to digest our suggestions for public engagement, and if any one of those makes sense, or one or more of those make sense for this year, to consider that for increasing our public engagement, and when we come back together, which will be in a couple months, share any thoughts you have about, or any requests you have about our part in doing that. A lot of this is your part, right? Because you all are the ones that set up the meetings, and we could potentially think about even the committee meetings to test out some of these things as well. So can we put that in your hands to absorb our feedback and think about how to implement that?
Absolutely. We can also include an agenda item for the next full board meeting to continue this discussion of public engagement as well. So we can report back to you all and then also continue the discussion.
Okay, great. And then it would also be great, I'm just reviewing everything we discussed, to come back with an update on the dashboard, which has been an important part of, could be an important part of public engagement as well, right?
Absolutely. We'll include that in our update.
Okay. To the other board members, is there anything that I've missed in terms of recap and direction to the DOJ staff to help us move forward? Okay, well, I think in terms of next steps, we've just covered that. And Angela, I look back towards you as co-chair to ask whether we then can adjourn the meeting.
I think that, yes, that sounds right to me as well. And I agree, this has been a really rich discussion, and I think it really, gives our DOJ staff a lot to work with in presenting us, the next outline. I think is going to be really helpful. So I really just appreciate everybody's engagement today. Oh, is it Rich? Rich, do you have a comment?
I do. Thank you so much, Angela. I agree. I'm glad that we were able to have a good discussion. I just want to make sure it's reflected in the minutes, DOJ, that both the California chiefs and the California sheriffs are not represented in the outline, the agenda that we're laying forth for the rest of the year. That is all.
Yes, and so the outline was drawn from the committee conversations where we did have law enforcement invited and involved in various committees where they were able to join. And of course, I would say to any board member or member of the public, you are always welcome to contact DOJ if you have any additional ideas that were not shared here today. And you can provide that comment. That comment gets, if it's from the public, that gets shared with us in between meetings. So, and if it's from the board, similarly, it gets incorporated into what we then start to do in the following meeting. So thank you so much to members of the public. Sorry, Angela, did you want to say more?
Yeah, no, I just want to second that and really want to encourage folks to attend the subcommittee meetings. A lot of really substantive work goes on in those, and want to hear all the perspectives on that. And just also note that our outline and the work we're doing is, it's a living document. A lot of this, as we discussed, is going to be stemming from the data, what regions we may be looking at, what areas, what subtopics. So, it's going to be evolving. So I think it's really important if folks were not able to be here today, to please come to the next subcommittee meetings and the next board meeting.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I may have missed this on the Bagley-Keene presentation, but do we need a motion and a second to adjourn, or can we just call it?
If there's no further discussion, there's no need for a motion to adjourn.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you all. We're finishing a little early, giving you back some of your time. Have a great day, and we'll see you in future meetings. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.